The Zone Coverage Podcast Network.
The secondary, they're looking for the big one. And it is a touchdown to who else but Adam Thielen. And now back to Latavius Murray sniffing the end zone, and he will get there. 38-yard touchdown run for Latavius Murray. And that's intercepted on a tip ball by Harrison Smith. Down the sideline, inside the 15, and dropped inside the 10. Cousins looking for the long touchdown. And he gets a touchdown to Aldrick Robinson.
Happy Monday. It's the Zone Coverage Football Machine. It's the Zone Coverage Podcast Network. It's the Reaction Podcast with yours truly, Sam Ekstrom, at Sam Ekstrom on Twitter, Vikings beat writer, zonecoverage.com, reacting to each Vikings game from a reporter's perspective, I guess you might say. You can find the normal weekly show Wednesday nights with Andy Carlson, Arif Hassan, Luke Inman. That's Wednesday nights, couple hours of Vikings and NFL talk. They take your calls. It is a riot. This show more the pragmatic approach. After watching the Vikings yesterday, they beat the New York Jets 37-17. Luke Inman and I were out at Lucky's 13 Pub in Burnsville. Luke is there every Sunday. I'm there with Luke when I'm not traveling or at the game, and it's a great time. You should come on out. Great food, great drink specials, Vikings giveaways, Vikings trivia, plenty of analysis during halftime and pregame and postgame. Come hang out with us sometime. Lucky's 13 Pub in Burnsville Center, County Road 42, every Sunday for every Vikings game. Oh, of course, and the plug for the website, zonecoverage.com. I tell you what, we put a lot of work into this thing. It's $2.99 a month to support it. And if you read the content, if you listen to the podcasts, $2.99 per month for unmetered access, and you can help keep the reporting strong, keep the staff strong, and you'll get some perks along the way, we promise. The scenario that we anticipated came true. The Vikings won, the Bears lost, the Packers were idle, and Minnesota is a first-place ball club once again. They've won 3 in a row. So the breaks that we suggested needed to be pumped a few weeks ago, I think that was an accurate statement. With the Vikings having so much in front of them, it's really hard to, when you deal with the small sample sizes in the NFL, I get it. It's you want to treat sort of every game as truth. Every game is a sign of what's to come, when really every game sort of operates in its own vacuum. You can have anomalies, like the Buffalo game, but the deja vu continues to last year. You've got a bad first 4 games. You've got a sudden turnaround in the second quarter of the season, and you've got some ugly wins along the way. I mean, the Vikings were not winning pretty last year at this time either. They had a kind of a grinded-out win against Chicago. They had a little bit of a sloppy win against Baltimore at home. Even their win against the Packers when Barr knocked Rodgers out, that wasn't a very attractive win, but they got the job done nonetheless. And that was the epitome of yesterday's game. A 20-point win where the Vikings really didn't play that well until, I guess you could say the second half was more what you'd want to see. First half hideous on both sides as the teams combined for 0-14 on third down. But I guess when you can win by 20 and you look to be the superior team in virtually every facet, that can be encouraging in some weird way to think that there can be better to come, and you're certainly not peaking too early. I think the Vikings peaked at a good time last year. They peaked late. They were playing their best football late in that season. And I think that can still happen for these Vikings. They'll get a great mid-season test against New Orleans next Sunday. But man, if you're a Jets fan, I mean, let's start with this. If you're a Vikings fan, how good does it feel when opposing markets say, this is what it's like to go up against the big boys? And then you look at the way they play and you realize how low things can get. The Vikings saw that with the Browns last year, certainly. They've seen it plenty with the Lions over the years and the Bears. And the Vikings spell in that stage, when it's happened, it's been short-lived. A couple of years in the early 2000s, a couple of years post-Favre when they really struggled in the Ponder era. But generally, the lows have been short-lived, and the Jets have had some torturous years, and they think they've got something in Sam Darnold. And I said going in, it hasn't all been Darnold. They're 3-3. They've maybe had one or two good Darnold games, but generally it's been the run game, it's been takeaways, defensive and special teams scores. That's how they won against Detroit. That's how they won against Denver with some great running game. And then last week against Indy was an impressive Darnold game. I'll buy that the wind had something to do with it, because I think it had something to do with any ball in the air yesterday. Kicking, passing, it was crazy. The wind gusts they showed on Fox were jarring. But Darnold looked uncomfortable. His receivers did him no help. That was the same thing that Josh Rosen has been dealing with in Arizona. Nobody can catch the ball. The punt returners were dropping it. The punters were dropping it. The snaps and the exchanges were poor. There were a ton of mistakes. And the Vikings certainly were far from the semblance of perfection in the first half. They were almost as bad in that first half of play, but then they corrected themselves in half number 2. And they outscored the Jets 27-10 in half number 2. But it turned out to be a relatively easy win. I was expecting more of a dogfight. Outdoors, in a venue where the franchise has never won. Not that that means anything for the here and now, but a place where the Vikings have superstitiously been snake bit. They got the win in comfortable fashion in the fourth quarter. Defense, again, just a little bit of relaxation late, and you thought it was going to get dicey with the Jets down 10 and driving, but then the interception by Holton Hill, I thought, was the icing on the cake. 3 second-half interceptions, and they all came within the first 3 plays of that drive. And a tiring Jets defense was forced to come on the field 8 different times in the second half. They didn't get much rest. The Vikings won the take-give in that game handily, about 32.5 to 27.5. And the second-half run game had chunk plays. It was Mike Zimmer once again afterward, emphasizing how important it is to stay patient with the run. And when you're facing a defense that's been on the field a lot, has the wind probably howling in its ears, and is down in the game, that can be demoralizing. So they get Murray for the 11-yard TD early in the second half, a 38-yard Murray TD. Rock Thomas had a 23-yard chunk. Mike Boone had one nice run in the game. And Murray had a couple that went for 9 or 10 yards that were nullified due to holding calls. And that's happened a few times this year where it could have really changed our perceptions, I think, of a run performance if some of those stand. And I never thought I'd see Murray with the breakaway speed like I did yesterday. He's never been a guy who's going to win a foot race against a quick defensive back, but he split through defenders on that 38-yarder and cruised to the end zone. As the Murray renaissance continues and the Vikings running game renaissance continues. And again, it's not like they've been consistently efficient. I think there's still a lot more to unlock there. Maybe they need Dalvin Cook to do that. Murray's 2 touchdown runs gave him 49 yards total. He had 20 yards on his other 13 carries. So that's 1.5 yards a carry. That's not very efficient. The Vikings as a team, 3.7 on the ground. That's still pretty below average. But if you go the famine, feast route, which in many years that was the Adrian Peterson method, if you can get the payoff of a 40-yard or close to it touchdown run, that is, I think, worth the patience. Plus, if you're able to convert an occasional third down after some run stuffs, well, then the run can be effective, too, as a clock-killing device. The Vikings did not convert well on third downs yesterday, but they still found a way to win the time of possession battle.
Cousins throws, and a catch is made by Thielen, and that'll put him over 100 yards.
So the Vikings hang 37 on the board, season high, and they win the take-give 4-0, which gave them some great field position situations in the second half. And the only other player who's been more productive the last couple weeks than Murray is, of course, Mr. Spitting Blood himself, Adam Thielen. 9 grabs, 110 yards. His pace for the season, 153 catches, which would beat Marvin Harrison's record by 10. 1,879 yards, which would pull him within 85 of Calvin Johnson's NFL record. And 11 touchdowns. He had his 5th touchdown yesterday on a beautiful pitch and catch, 34 yards, against Darryl Roberts, the backup corner. The angle that I was playing going into this one was Perry Nickerson, 6th-round corner out of Tulane, who had given up an NFL-high 17 catches, 197 yards in his 3 games played this year. And the thinking was that Thielen in the slot, Nickerson in the slot, that's going to be the matchup. Well, the way things played out, the Jets didn't have Nickerson exposed too often against Thielen, and Darryl Roberts really got tested as much as anybody, and he came through on a number of plays when he was paired up against Diggs down the field. But Thielen had to work for the yardage, especially late. He reportedly was doubled most of the game, according to Mike Zimmer. And this will be a really fun game to watch the All-22. The broadcast version is not going to tell you what the secondary was doing against Thielen and Diggs. So going into that fourth quarter with Thielen stuck at 84 yards and the Vikings not really in a passing mode, you wondered whether Thielen was going to make it and extend his 100-yard streak and tie the late Charlie Hennigan, whose family was apparently watching at a Texas bar taking tequila shots as Thielen was approaching the record or getting the record. But the Vikings faced a 3rd and 6. They fired to Thielen. Right sideline, wide open, 21 yards, record setter. And he can tie now the NFL record next week for the most consecutive 100-yard games in any stretch. There's a lot of records going on here. First, he was the modern-day record holder. Now he's tied Charlie Hennigan for the all-time record for 100-yard games to start a season. And then the next milestone is 100-yard games consecutively at any point in the season. And he would tie Megatron, Calvin Johnson. Pretty good company to be in for Thielen, who got the game started with that touchdown. And after that, the passing game slowed. Here are the Vikings' drives after their first touchdown drive, when they had 68 yards on 4 plays, penalty-aided as well. Cousins only threw for 38 yards after that point in the first half. This is an all-time series. 3 plays, minus 24 yards in 2 minutes and 24 seconds. And I still think that Cousins might have been in the end zone. I still think that might be a safety, and the Jets should have had 2. And the funny thing about that is that it turned out to be a big play in the game because Matt Weil, who had his best game as a Viking, flipped the field from the back line of his end zone and got the ball down inside the Jets' own 40. And they didn't review it. I thought that could definitely have been not only a safety, but Cousins kind of lost the ball there in the end zone. Maybe it was picked up. I thought that was a peculiar non-review by the Jets. So the Vikings go minus 24 yards there. Next drive, little movement. 5 plays, 31 yards, punt. Next drive, 3 plays, 7 yards, punt. Next drive, field goal after having the short field following the short Jets punt. Next drive, 3 plays, minus 4. 3 plays, 1. 3 plays, 2. That's 5 3-and-outs in the first half for the Vikings. And on their final drive, they missed a field goal of 42 yards, which I think Bailey hit absolutely how he wanted to. That thing was headed just inside the near post, and he was assuming that the wind would probably take that a little bit. He did not think it would take it all the way wide. And in addition, I think it might have been left short. That thing hit on the end line behind the end zone that might not have even had the distance. That was a wild gust that burned Bailey. And I'm honestly not going to be overly concerned about that kick. I think Bailey has rebounded nicely from his bad Philadelphia game. But it was vital that the Vikings come out in the second half and get a 2-possession lead. That's the magic with this defense, I think. When they get up by 10 or more, especially against a young quarterback. And as I mentioned, Sam Darnold was raw yesterday. I mean, 17 of 42, 206, but he didn't have a completion in the third quarter. He was stuck at 8 there for about 20 minutes of game time, and then garbage time got him up over 206, but 3 sacks, 3 picks, QBR of 5.9. And again, his receivers didn't help him out whatsoever. His running game didn't help him out whatsoever. And I'm intending on doing a second look at how the Vikings stopped the run so effectively against a Jets team that, with Isaiah Crowell, had run it pretty effectively in a number of games. They had a 323-yard performance against Denver. Crowell was 6.1 yards on the year per carry, 2.6 against the Vikings on 11 touts. Again, they let the tight end loose a couple times. Chris Herndon nearly had 2 touchdowns, did have 1 touchdown, but that's a pretty in-depth nitpick when you win by 20. Kirk Cousins and the batted passes strike again, however. He finishes with a respectable 95.9 rating, 241, 2 touchdowns, no picks, just 1 sack, and no lost fumbles, breaking a 4-game skid in that department. But it was still an uneven day from Kirk. First half, we've talked about that a lot of that's on the quarterback. We don't have a number yet at the time of recording from Pro Football Focus on the batted passes. It was 3 or 4, and I know there was a deflection beyond the line of scrimmage that some people were counting, some people weren't, but it's at least 3. He came into play tied with Joe Flacco for the league in batted passes with 11. He's probably leading all by himself now. And I tweeted it yesterday, the more this becomes part of the scouting report, I think the more teams are going to try and attack it. You know, certainly the coaching is always get your hands up, but when you know that you can produce results doing that, there's a little more blood in the water, and I think guys become more cognizant. We were getting quotes from Buffalo players after the Bills debacle, and they were saying that it was an emphasis all week to get the ball out of Cousins' hands, and he fumbled twice in that game, and I think that's something that you can work on. You can make it a point of emphasis in practice to get your hands up. And the last 2 teams have done that to a point where it's going to become part of the scouting report. It is on his permanent record now, susceptible to the batted ball. The Vikings have to stop, too, with these lateral swing plays. John DeFilippo and Kirk Cousins have admitted that ideally those plays are forward passes. So, think back to the Philly game. The little pass to Rock Thomas is not a bad pass, but you're opening the door for the running back to get distracted, to maybe get hit, drop the ball, and it's a fumble. As they lost it against Philadelphia, they almost lost another one, which was even more egregious on Sunday when Cousins sees the defender, tries to throw it into the ground, does so, and does it backwards. And if the Vikings don't recover, that's just another bad fumble on Kirk Cousins' part. And they did that play to the opposite side earlier in the game that was also lateral. It seems like a fairly easily correctable, as Christian Ponder might say, thing to amend. Certainly not going to box in Cousins to this opinion after 2 games, but just last 2 games, just limit it to those. I think it'd been a little Keenum-like. A reliance on the run, a reliance on the defense, some great throws, the pass to Thielen, the pass to Robinson, and some risky ones as well. Some erratic play. I don't think he's Case Keenum. I think he's better than Case Keenum, and I think that's meted itself out early in this year that Cousins is more established and Keenum was more of an anomaly. But the last 2 games, that's the feeling I've gotten. Now, they've won, and that's what matters most. 4-2-1 record, a chance to get greedy and go 6-2-1 at the bye. At minimum, Vikings need to win 1 of the next 2 at home. I think that probably happens. And you can live with a 5-3-1 at the bye if they do lose one of these next 2 games. Now, if you're going to win one of the next two, which one would you want it to be? I mean, let's say you were guaranteed to win one and guaranteed to lose one. Who do you want that win against? I'd want it against New Orleans. Even though that means you lose to a division opponent in Detroit, you've got a chance against Detroit again later in the year. You don't know if Detroit's going to be around. The NFC North is a roll of the dice, week in, week out basis. Bears have come back to the pack. Lions have, I think, reemerged as a team that can compete a little bit. People were down on them. And again, it's that first quarter of the season when people draw impressions that so quickly can get disproven. Chicago was playing a little above their potential for 4 weeks. Detroit was a little below, and now that's evened out. The Packers have skated by with some very narrow wins after Aaron Rodgers' vintage performances. And I think the Vikings have pretty much been who they were supposed to be now through 7 games. Slow start, strong next 3, 4-2-1. That's approximately maybe where you would have estimated them. Probably a 5-2, maybe a little more appropriate. But I think you'll take it if you're a Vikings fan, and I think there's reason to believe that the other 3 teams competing are not slouches in the NFC North, but none of them are going to blow the top off the NFC. It's hard to imagine like a 5-game winning streak coming from any of those 3 clubs. So I just think you got to beat the established entity in New Orleans, because the second seed, which we were on the verge of giving up on there, and myself included, I wasn't sure if the Vikings would be around to compete for home field, but Washington, Carolina, New Orleans, those are really the only other clubs that have gained any kind of separation. And this is the only crack the Vikings will get at New Orleans. And if they lose, then they are, in essence, 3 games back. They'll be 2 games back in terms of wins and losses, and they will not have the tiebreak. Granted, the Vikings probably won't be tying New Orleans because of the tie on their record. But just keep that in mind, too. All right, let's address the necessary evil. Injuries.
If we receive any further word on Rhodes, well, he is in a lot of pain.
If you're keeping score at home, that's 8 starters now in peril. Came into the game with no Joseph, no Sendejo, no Cook, no Griffin, no Reef. Added to the list, Tom Compton, knee injury. Anthony Barr, hamstring. Xavier Rhodes, ankle. So I'm just going to go down the list and tell you what I know from being at the facility of these 8 guys. Andrew Sendejo. He's been out for 2 weeks with a groin. He has been jogging and rehabbing on a near field the last 2 weeks. Usually when players are present and stretching and rehabbing on site during practice, that is a sign that they are close. I could see Andrew Sendejo returning. Riley Reef. He has not been around. We know he's had the foot since week 3. He tried to gut it out, and he was not effective. My feeling is that they've shut him down potentially until the bye. I think they want to avoid the constant re-aggravation. They're keeping him off his feet. I don't see Reef playing in this next game. Just my opinion. Dalvin Cook, the starting and the stopping and the false starts, it needs to stop. Unless they feel like he is 100% ready to go, I don't think they're going to try again with Cook. He tried last Wednesday. He seemingly re-aggravated it to the point where he couldn't practice Thursday or Friday after warming up. So I would not expect Cook. Joseph suited up on Friday, participated in a limited fashion. I could see him returning. That might be a 1 week, almost a veteran rest game for him. He's dealing with a couple nagging things, ankle, knee, shoulder. He could be back. Everson Griffin, it's week to week with Ev. And even if he did return to the practice field Wednesday, maybe it's a situation where you need to give him a week of acclimation before you throw him into a game. I don't think Griffin plays this week, and I'd be surprised if he played before the bye, to be honest. Okay, so those are the 5 that we knew about. Now with Compton, Barr, and Rhodes, You worry about Compton because it's knee. Anytime it's knee, that's rarely a one-week injury. He didn't return to the game. Vikings do have some depth on the interior. Danny Isidora, Brett Jones. And this Vikings line has been so vulnerable anyway that maybe some new blood would freshen things up, liven things up, and it's hard to do worse than allowing 124 pressures in 6 games. I thought the line was better yesterday. Whether that had anything to do with Compton's absence, I don't know. He hasn't always been the main culprit. There have been games where he has been a culprit. Anthony Barr, hamstring. It's always concerning when the ruling is doubtful on an injured player to return. We've seen how bothersome the hamstring can be with Cook, so that doesn't necessarily bode well for Barr. Eric Wilson, though, he was a pleasant surprise in training camp, and I think the team likes him a lot, so that's probably your replacement for Barr if he can't play. Mike Zimmer downplayed the Xavier Rhodes injury, and if we know anything about Rhodes, it's that he often has to leave games, but also can play through injury pretty well, and seems to be used to playing a little banged up. So I think Rhodes might be 50-50 for next week. And with things like hamstrings, ankles, knees, you got to wait till the next day. You got to wait for a couple days to see how that thing settles, swells, and feels after some rest. Because after a football game, you've got plenty of adrenaline. You're going to have bruises elsewhere, too. You got to see what happens about 72 hours out of a game. I think 2 or 3 guys might come back for next week. You're not going to get all 8. So again, the Vikings' depth will be tested. Rookies shown against the Jets. Brandon Zylstra, first career catch. Jalen Holmes, first career sack. Ryan O'Neal, great in a starting role again. Holton Hill replaces Rhodes, gets an interception. Rock Thomas, Mike Boone helping in the run game. You never expect it, but the rookies always end up playing a big role. A lot of people thought this would be a nondescript rookie class. They wouldn't have a big impact. And here they are, a lot of them, playing big-time reps for the Minnesota Vikings. It's a Zone Coverage Football Machine post-game reaction. My name's Sam Ekstrom. I'm on Twitter at Sam Ekstrom, on Instagram at Sam Ekstrom NFL. Follow along there. And you can hear your normally scheduled Zone Coverage Football Machine Wednesday night with Andy, Arif, and Luke in the Zone Coverage studios. My name's Sam Ekstrom once again. Thanks for listening. Talk to you next week.